Today we're going to reflect on SD 46.11, Kathavatthu Sutta. The meaning of the title is the discourse on points for discussion. Kathā means talk, discussion. Vatthu here means thing. It can mean a lot of things. It can even mean land. But here vatthu, it means points, okay, or things for discussion, if you like. So Kathavatthu, points for discussion. There is an Abhidhamma book by this name, and it has been translated as points of controversy. So Kathavatthu here in our sutta, we translate it as points for discussion. Sutta, of course, means discourse, teaching, or thread of teaching handed down from the Buddha's time to this present moment. And the reference is A 3.67. This sutta is from the Book of Threes in the Anguttara, sutta number 67. And the theme is answering questions and the qualities of a true Dhamma speaker. So you can find all these things in a little blurb on the top right hand corner of the title page of each sutta translation in the SD series. Now, when we talk, this sutta talks about the proper way of speaking Dhamma, proper way of conversation, the kind of topics that we should cover. So it's a very helpful sutta in terms of, for example, counselling, in terms of teaching Dhamma. Now, if we look at Buddhism as a whole, we can say that Buddhism, early Buddhism that is, has been a counselling religion. It is a counselling religion. Counselling in the sense of people helping, learning to listen to others, to help them, to understand them, to learn from the suffering of others. Remember, in Buddhism, the First Noble Truth, the truth of suffering, is not just a negative statement. It means there is this lesson, this ongoing lesson in our life, in the life of others, in nature, that's teaching us a universal message of impermanence. So, when we counsel others, we're trying to remind them of this reality, to be aware of this reality, and to, in a sense, to benefit from this understanding. And of course, another aspect of counseling is self-counseling. Imagine if you're alone and you are the only Buddhist in the area, and it's difficult to contact other Buddhists, and I know many of you who are listening to this talk are living in quite remote areas of the world, so to speak, where Buddhism is difficult to be found. And the best way you can find Buddhism is probably through the internet. And of course your own books on sutta study like this one. So you have to counsel yourself. You have to learn to understand yourself. And this is a very important aspect of Buddhism. So if you look at Buddhism, early Buddhism, there are these wonderful qualities. In fact, there are 6 characteristics of early Buddhism that shows Buddhism to be concerned with mental health, with a person-centered kind of reenacting of the Buddha's self-awakening. In other words, we use the Buddha's example to examine ourselves, to understand ourselves, and to be free from suffering. In that sense, we are reenacting the Buddha's quest, the Buddha's awakening, and of course the Buddha's compassion in teaching others what he has discovered in self-healing. The first quality is that you find in Buddhism there's this broad vocabulary of the mind. In other words, lots of terms for the mind, consciousness, and so on. And number 2, there are many wonderful theories of the mind. Many teachings the Buddha gave to explain how the mind works, the nature of being, and healing, and so on. Thirdly, there are detailed and effective techniques of self-healing, and of course other healing also, such as meditation. And number 4, there are dramatic, interesting cases, case histories, stories of suffering saints, happy saints who have suffered so much. They understand their suffering, they are free from their suffering. So these are case stories, in other words. And we also have living examples of wonderful renunciants and lay people today who live the Buddhist life. So in other words, Buddhism is still a living religion today. And number 6, you find today the modern mind sciences are also discovering Buddhism. They're making use of Buddhist teachings. They are taking in lots of Buddhist teachings, and in an important way, Buddhism is changing how the psychologists look at themselves and look at psychology itself. So these are 6 wonderful qualities which shows Buddhism to be a very important contributor to the modern field of mental health. So now in this sutta, we have different aspects of this ways of applying mental health, understanding mental health, teaching mental health to others too, through communication with others. So let's look at the sutta right away. The translation is on page 105. The Discourse on the Points for Discussion, A3.67. Okay? Now I'll just read the text and then I'll explain as we go along. Okay, we're on page 105. Bhikshus, there are these 3 topics for discussion. What are the 3? One may talk about the past, saying, thus it was in the past. One may talk about the future, saying, thus it will be in the future. One may now talk about now in the present, saying, thus it is now in the present. So this sutta begins, the Buddha begins straight away by telling us when we talk Dhamma, what do we really talk about? What can we talk about? We can only talk about the past, the future, and the present. In the suttas, the flow of time is always mentioned in this way: past, future, present. I've not found any reference why this is a sequence, but I think it's quite logical in the sense that we begin from the past, and then we look to the future, and then we come to the present moment where we are right now. What does this mean? Why does the Buddha begin by mentioning these 3 periods of time? Well, this is kind of extension or explanation of impermanence, right? So if we talk all these things, this first part in one word, it will be impermanence. So whatever we talk about in the suttas, in our daily life, it's only about one thing. It's about impermanence in very complicated ways. So this is, although the beginning here seems to be quite mundane, quite simple, there's a profound aspect of this if we look deeper. And this is going to be expanded to the rest of the sutta. Okay? So now in this translation beginning on page 105, you see I've given subheadings. In the next section, the subheading is the 4 ways of answering a question. All right? So it's good to, when we look at the sutta, have an overview first. So the first thing, look at the headings, the 4 ways of answering a question, or better still, the 4 proper ways of answering a question. And then next page you see another subheading, the 4 principles of discourse. And then the next subheading you see the 3 points of decorum of discourse. Okay? And then next on page 107, and attentiveness during discussion. Right? And then the sutta closes with the verses. Okay, so it's a very quite direct, quite clear. This sutta quite quite easy. It is instructive in the sutta. There's not much deep philosophy. So it is meant for the training of a Dhamma teacher, a Dhamma speaker, a counselor. In other words, it's an excellent document basically on wholesome human communication. Now let's go back to the second section on page 105, the 4 ways of answering a question. Bhikshus, when engaged in discussion, an individual should be known whether he is fit to talk with or unfit to talk with. Alright, here it means who can we usefully talk with and who is not ready to be spoken with, so to speak. Right? So we have to look at this in a positive way. In other words, in a sense, how to prepare a person, a situation, so that we can communicate effectively. Okay, here the 2 parts. First is someone who's not ready. In other words, when it is not really time to talk Dhamma or to counsel people, to basically just to listen, in other words. In this case, the person is not ready. The Buddha says, Bhikshus, if a person, when asked a question, does not give a categorical yes or no answer to a question, that should be answered categorically. Does not give an analytical or qualified answer to a question, that should be answered analytically. Does not give a counter question to a question, that should be counter question. And does not put aside a question, that should be put aside. Okay, now these 4 are very important ways of answering a question. In fact, the whole suttas, there are suttas dealing with just these 4 topics. The 4 proper ways of answering a question. So in other words, what the Buddha says, if someone does not know this, to answer questions properly, he must be taught. So this is the task of a teacher. The Dhamma teacher will teach his students, say, okay, you must know this basic skills about teaching Dhamma, discussing Dhamma. The first is, how do we answer questions? The first kind of question has got a certain question has got a categorical answer. In other words, yes or no. Okay. If someone asks, does Buddhism teach karma, for example? The answer is yes or no. We don't answer in other ways. And then the second kind of question is analytical. So someone may ask, so what is this karma? Well, you can't say yes or no. You have to give a detailed answer. So you have to know how to answer the question. Is it categorical? Is it analytical? Number 3 is sometimes someone may ask a question. For example, says, who is the Buddha? Wow, this is a really big question. So I mean, you can spend a whole day, a whole week. There are books written on this topic. Who's the Buddha? So if we start giving a long lecture, people might get bored. So this is where you got to ask a counter question. You can ask, for example, what do you want to know about the Buddha? Or why do you ask this question? What aspect of the Buddha do you want to know? Maybe this person might want to know, okay, is the Buddha a human being? Or what does it mean to have a teacher like the Buddha to be a human being? And so on and so forth. So in other words, you have to narrow down to exactly what is it that this person wants to know. And based on his wisdom, we fill in the blanks of ignorance, so to speak. Okay, so this is the counter question. Okay? To clarify, to narrow down, to focus the area that we need to deal with. So counter question is not a way of evading the answer, but rather to clarify the purview, the area we need to deal with. And in counselling, you remember in the first part of counselling, Buddhist counselling, asking the right questions is very important. And then the 4th part is putting aside the questions. Certain questions are wrongly put, or they should not be asked because they're going to distract us from the real issue. For example, someone, let's say you're the counselor and you're trying to help this person, and this person will ask you questions like, how can you help me? You've never gone through this problem before, right? Questions like that. So you don't have to answer those questions. You can say, well, here we are talking about your problems, right? So there are, and also in Buddhism, there are certain things we try not to discuss because there's no way of finding any fixed or accurate answer. For example, the beginning of the world, who created the world, things like that. So these are very speculative questions. In fact, later on in the sutta, you find this area covered in more detail. So I think for the moment, that should be quite sufficient for these 4 kinds of questions. Then in the second part, which is at the top of page 106, the Buddha says, but bhikshus, if an individual, when asked a question, knows how to answer all the 4 questions, he answers a categorical question with a categorical answer, he answers an analytical question with an analytical answer, a certain question he answers with a counter question, and the 4th way is to put aside the question. In other words, to tell this person, can you please rephrase the question, in other words. Okay? Right, so that is the second section of the 4 ways of answering the question. Now next is the 4 principles of discourse. How do we carry on the conversation, the discussion? Bhikshus, when engaged in discussion, an individual should be known whether he is fit to talk with or unfit to talk with. So here, if this person does not have 4 understanding, then the person is not ready. What are these 4 things that we need to know when we discuss? Oh, everything is put in bold for you there. Section 3.2, you can see number 1. He keeps to what is possible and what is impossible. So in other words, when we discuss something, especially in terms of Dhamma, we've got to talk about things which are realistic, in other words. Suppose we talk about beginning of the world. I mean, you can try to discuss that, but you find everybody's got their opinion and nobody comes to a conclusion. So it's not going to be very helpful. Yeah, maybe writing essays or something else. Someone writes his opinions and you read it, and whether you like it or not, it's okay. But if we really discuss, it's not something useful, because these are things we still do not fully know yet. So these are kind of topics which are not very helpful, in other words. Same thing with ideas about God, for example. You can even bring God believers together and you talk about God and you find they all don't agree exactly how this God should be. So these are certain topics are impossible to agree upon, in other words. Number 2, the next skill is he keeps to agreed assumptions. It's almost like how to arbitrate and negotiate, right? So you find here, in other words, when we talk Dhamma, there are certain, as we go deeper into certain teachings, so we've got to build up the concepts step by step. So you've got to make sure the audience is to understand this first assumption or first concepts. Do you understand this? Okay, when you understand, we go to the next step and so on. So we agree on certain ideas, and from there we build the next argument, the next understanding. So keeps to the agreed assumptions. Imagine if you are discussing this with, let's say, an evangelist, someone who's trying to convert you. This person usually does not keep to the assumption. He will, as we say, he will move the goalposts around. So it's very difficult to talk with such a person. In other words, this person is dishonest. Now in the Buddha's time, you never see things like this. In the Buddha's time, whenever Buddhists and non-Buddhists meet, or any group of any religious people meet together, even though they may be from different religions, they always respect one another and they always follow these rules. So if they find that the other, say the Buddha is saying the right thing, they will say, oh sadhu, okay, so now we follow you. There is this wonderful way of openness and curiosity to learn, in other words. Then skill number 3, he keeps to known teachings. In other words, we discuss what we know. We're not going to argue about what we do not know, or very speculative things. And number 4, we keep to proper procedure, proper way of talking. We don't shout or cross-talk. There is this respect for each other, in other words. So there you are. This is the decorum of Dhamma discourse or meaningful discussion. You can apply this to arbitration, negotiations, right? So you find whatever is good in the Buddhist teachings, they're also applicable to daily life. Don't be surprised, you get lots of people teaching management, they look at this kind of teaching, they love this kind of points, then they will adapt this to their own lectures. Alright, then in fact in the next section the Buddha talks about the 3 points of decorum of discourse. In other words, basically this is the proper etiquette to follow when we talk Dhamma. Here there are 3 points, right? Those who evade these 3 points, they're not ready to have a discussion. So we should have these 3 kinds of respect for the other party, so to speak. What is it? Number 1, the person or we do not evade the issue by wandering from one topic to another. So when we discuss Dhamma, we stick to the topic. You don't wander about. So it's amazing. You find that Sutta gives all this advice. It's like the rules of debate here, right? You don't wander about. You stay to one topic until you feel, okay, we have discussed this enough, now let's go to a new topic. Okay? So we do not evade the issue by wandering about, by changing the subject, in other words. Point of decorum number 2, he does not lead the discussion astray. He does not go off the point. Here, now in the first case, this person is dishonest by evading the answer. Okay? But in the second point, he actually leads the whole discussion elsewhere. They're quite closely overlap, but the second one is kind of on his own, he does this. And the third point is very interesting. What in psychology we call it is the defense mechanism. When you are unable to answer a question, what do? You show anger, aggression, and some people might be afraid of this, so they wouldn't press the question. So if you show anger at once, it shows that you have not observed the decorum of proper discussion. So here, notice in the suttas, the Buddha says, if we have during Dhamma discussion, we do not show anger, aversion, or discontent. In other words, you must have goodwill, loving kindness, respect for each other. So you notice in Dhamma discussions, people don't quarrel. The monks or the speakers or the nuns, the lay teachers, they don't quarrel or shout at each other. There's always this peaceful discussion with one another, and it's always a joy to listen to them. Now we have the 4 points of decorum. This side was 3, now there are 4 points. A set of 4. This is a new set. Again here, these are the 4 points. If the person does not know these 4 points, is not ready for discussion.